and welcome back to Graphic Novel Review. And this month I read Anya's Ghost in preparation for October, so trying to get a little spookier. So this is Anya, and Anya is a high school student. She immigrated from Russia when she was about 7. She seems to struggle with just being a teen, being an immigrant. She struggles with her body image. She seems to reject things about her culture, like she doesn't go to Orthodox church, and she doesn't want to eat Russian food. She has a super mean best friend named Shaban, and a crush on a guy named Sean at school. And she constantly ignores the only other Russian student at school, Dima. So one day when Anya is walking home from school, she falls into a well and finds a skeleton, and its owner, a ghost. The ghost is of a young girl, and she can't leave the well because she has to stay close to her bones. Anya is in the well for like 2 days, and then is rescued. She goes home and she thinks everything is gonna go back to normal, but she is wrong because she's accidentally taken a bone from the ghost, and the ghost has followed her home. And that's what sets the story in motion. The spoiler review is next, but I did enjoy this book. I enjoyed the illustrations. It looks like it's gonna be a fun read about a friendship with a ghost, but it turns out to be a little bit more than that. It takes a little bit of a turn. So overall, I'd give it 4 out of 5 ghosts, and I would give it a try if I were you. So the spoiler review is next, just a heads up. So Anya makes it home from falling down the well, and she misses school for a couple days just to recover from the fall. And then she's at school and she's in the restroom. She looks at the mirror and she sees the ghost behind her in one of the stalls. So the ghost has followed her because she's accidentally taken a finger bone from the well. She thinks everything is gonna be super normal, but it turns out that everything is supernatural because the ghost has followed her. Anya is pretty angsty. She has no interest in babysitting a ghost from like the 1800s. And she's very annoyed with the ghost until she proves herself useful to Anya. She helps Anya cheat on one of her tests. She helps Anya get closer to Sean, the boy she has a crush on. And slowly they develop a little bit more of a friendly relationship with each other. And then we find out a little bit more information about, the ghost. So the ghost name is Emily Riley. And her backstory, according to her, is that she had been murdered. So her family was like super religious, and a man comes by their cottage, like their farmhouse one day, and he's asking for shelter for the night, and they let him in. At night, the person who they invited into their home kills her father and her mother, and then Emily finds the man with a bloody knife, and he chases her with a knife, and she runs into the woods. She's trying her best to get away, but she falls down the well, and that is how she dies. She dies of hunger and thirst alone in the well. So after Emily tells her story, Anya and Emily become very close, and they go everywhere together. Anya's kind of a little shy, doesn't really talk a lot to anybody at school. So Emily gets Anya to talk to Sean, and Emily sneaks into his backpack, sees that there's gonna be a house party, and Emily encourages Anya, like whispers in her ear as a tiny little ghost, because Emily can change sizes, so she gets real close to her ear and whispers to Anya what to say, which is basically, hey, are you going to this guy's party? Can I get a ride? Pick me up at this time. So she kind of gives Anya some confidence to do that. So she helps Anya get dressed up for the party, and Anya has like body image issues and doesn't feel comfortable with the clothes that Emily is picking. She's like picking super revealing clothes, and Anya doesn't feel comfortable with that, but she listens to Emily because Emily's just super encouraging, all of a sudden trying to force this relationship with Sean, which Sean has a girlfriend named Elizabeth, and she's like a perfectly nice person. Anya thinks she's a perfectly nice person, but Emily just really hates this Elizabeth person and wants Anya to steal Sean away from Elizabeth. So they go to the party together. So it's Sean and Elizabeth in the front seat, and Anya and tiny Emily in the back seat. So they go to the party. Anya gets separated from the couple, and she's kind of just feeling uncomfortable and wanting to leave. So she goes to look for Sean, and Sean is like in a room, and Anya hears like someone else's voice in the room with Sean, and Elizabeth is like standing looking upset outside of the room. So she finds out that Sean constantly cheats on Elizabeth, and Anya is kind of just like disgusted with Sean now. She leaves, she walks out, and Emily as Emily and Anya are walking home, Emily is just very upset with Anya. Like, how can you get away? You should go try and get him to go out with you. He's interested in you. Why don't you go for it? But Anya's just not interested because he doesn't seem like a very nice person anymore. But Emily's attitude just completely changes. She seems to just like be pressuring Anya. So then they make it home, and Anya wakes up the next morning, and she turns around and sees that Emily physically looks completely different. Like, she looks taller, has longer hair, has like a bow in her hair, and she also seems to have kept the night prior's personality change. Like, she's just a lot more like hardcore. She's like smoking a ghost cigarette. So she just feels very uncomfortable until finally one day Anya's so uncomfortable that she leaves Emily's finger behind, so Emily can't follow her around everywhere. And she skips school and goes to the library to do research about Emily. And while she is at the library, she finds Dima, the other Russian student. And he helps her like do some research about Emily, and that's when we get to find out a little bit more about Anya's backstory, which she immigrated to New England from Russia when she was about 7, and was bullied and had a really hard time. And she shares this because Dima is like always getting beaten up because he's just like so different. And they go to a private school, and I assume that they don't have like a large population of immigrant students, so they're struggling. And Anya is just talking about how hard it was to be the new kid in school while you're in a new country. And she talks about a lot about trying to lose her accent, which is like really sad, but also like relatable. Like trying to fit in with like a new culture you're not familiar with. So they have a little heart-to-heart. And in the research, they find out that Emily has not been telling the truth about her backstory. She did not get murdered. In fact, she may be a murderer. She was in love with a man who was not in love with her. He was in love with somebody else, so she chose to lock up the man she's in love with and his girlfriend in a house, and she set it on fire. And the townspeople found out about this and went out to look for her and are chasing her, and that is when Emily falls down the hill and dies. So it's not that she was murdered, it's that she was a murderer trying to run away from justice. So this is when things get pretty scary for Anya. So this is when things get pretty scary for Anya and her family. She goes back home and finds Emily in her room, and Emily is showing her that now, because obviously Emily's a ghost, she can't really hold on to things. We see scenes of Anya flipping magazine pages for her because she can't really hold anything, touch anything. She kind of is translucent, transparent, fog, smoke. But she's showing Anya now that she can like physically pick things up. And the reason that she's telling her this is because she's moved her finger bone somewhere where Anya cannot find it, which means that Emily doesn't really have to leave Anya's home. Anya can't get rid of her. Anya confronts Emily about being dishonest about her backstory. And then Emily just completely threatens Anya and her family. So Anya lives with her mother and her little brother. So she starts threatening them. She will put marbles on the floor so her mom like sprains her ankle. She puts rat poison in her food, and Anya is like struggling to hide what Emily is doing, but like not saying like, hey, there's a ghost trying to kill us, but also trying to save her family from Emily at the same time. So eventually Anya's mother leaves for the night, and it's just Anya and her little brother at home, and unfortunately Emily, and she's super scared. She wakes up to screams, and it is Emily scaring her little brother in bed, just like hovering over him. Anya finds it just as Emily is trying to pick it up. She snatches it, she runs to the woods, runs to the well, and is about to throw it in there. And this is where Anya confronts Emily about trying to live through Anya. So Emily died at a young age, so she didn't really get to go to parties, and also it was like the 1800s, so she didn't really get to do a lot of the things that Anya can do. So she dresses Anya up in revealing clothes, she makes her go to parties, she makes her talk to boys, wants her to end up with them. And Anya's like, you're trying to live through me, that's weird and not okay. And then Emily hits back by telling Anya that she's selfish. She's like, she hides her last name so it's not ethnic. She doesn't want to eat Russian food. Like, she's like, you're selfish, you're hurting your family because you're like denying this part of yourself. And then they just like are bickering back and forth. And then Emily, there's like this scene where Emily like has had it because Anya's like, I'm done with this. So she like goes through Anya. I assume like she was gonna like push her or hurt her because she's right next to a well. And this is when Anya just has it, and she is like, nope, bone in the well, you're staying down there because this is too much. And in true horror movie fashion, Emily crawls out from the well to come and hurt Anya. Anya runs for a little bit and then just kind of turns back, and instead of just like shouting things, that she just like has a very real moment with Emily where she's like, I don't understand why you're vengeful. Like, what you're vengeful for just doesn't even exist anymore. Like, you can't hurt people, you can't judge people, you're upset about things that happened a really long time ago. And that apparently really hits Emily hard to the point where she's like, okay. I don't know if she's like found peace and is like moving on, but basically she just, her and her ghost body and bones crawl back into the well and kind of just disappear. Then I guess sometime later we see Anya in the woods next to the well, and it's being covered up by a construction crew, and it's so people will no longer fall in the well. And she also makes up in the woods with her friend Siobhan, and she kind of just smiles at the end, and that's the ending that we get. Everything seems like it's gone back to normal, and Anya seems pretty happy. So overall, I quite enjoyed this book. It's quite a short read. It is monochromatic, and it makes sense for the book because even though sometimes the book's a little funny or fun, both Anya and Emily are kind of angsty, so it kind of fits the mood, but I would check it out if I were you. It is a good read if you're trying to get into like the fall Halloween-y spirit. I know it's September, but it is Halloween now. Happy Halloween. And yeah, I give it 4 out of 5 ghosts. Check it out. See you next time.